The man's wrists were forced together with a metallic snap, the cold bite of steel pressing into his skin as two federal agents shoved him against the hood of his own car. Their voices, clipped and commanding, carried across the crowded street. Passers-by slowed their pace, drawn to the confrontation, but no one stepped forward. A murmur spread, "Why him? Why here?" The air thickened with the familiar weight of tension, that unspoken recognition that something was wrong, yet dangerous to interrupt. The accused man did not resist. He lifted his eyes, steady and unyielding, and met the gaze of his captors with silence that unsettled more than protest ever could. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed not in ragged clothes, but in a sharp charcoal suit. His tie had come loose in the scuffle, the knot hanging slightly off-center. He looked less like a suspect and more like someone stepping out of a courtroom. His shoes shone from recent polish, his briefcase knocked to the ground beside him, spilling papers onto the pavement. Legal documents fluttered across the asphalt like fallen leaves. The agents ignored them. The man did not. He saw every sheet scatter and held his silence as though it were the only shield left to him. His name was Marcus Red. To the world, a defense attorney with a reputation for standing beside those who had been crushed by a system built to silence them. To himself, he was still the young soldier who had once stood in desert heat half a world away, wearing a uniform instead of a tailored suit. On his forearm, just beneath the cuff of his shirt, lay a scar carved by shrapnel, a reminder of comrades who never returned. The desert had burned his lungs with sand and smoke, but it had also carved something permanent in him. The discipline to endure, the will to face down fear without flinching. Even now, under the pressing weight of authority, that soldier lived inside him. His breathing slowed, measured, steady as if he were back on patrol, every second a test of patience. The agents barked accusations, fraud, obstruction, collusion with so-called enemies of the state, words designed to stain reputations before evidence ever reached a courtroom. Yet Marcus did not respond. The crowd watched, torn between curiosity and unease, their silence complicit, their hearts stirred by a sense of injustice they dared not voice. Years earlier, Marcus had made a vow at a graveside. He remembered the sting of gunpowder in the air, the folded flag pressed into a grieving mother's hands. He had sworn that if he made it back, if he could survive when others did not, he would live his life defending those who had no shield. He had studied law not for ambition but for duty, carrying the discipline of the battlefield into the courtroom. His victories had never been for himself but for the voiceless. And perhaps that was why he was here now, targeted, accused, restrained before strangers' eyes. He had rattled the wrong cages, defended the wrong clients, stood too firmly in the wrong places. The agents tightened their grip, dragging him toward a black SUV parked at the curb. His steps were heavy but deliberate, not stumbling, not yielding. That silence, so measured, so unbroken, began to unnerve even his captors. One muttered that he should say something, anything, but Marcus's lips pressed together in a line as hard as iron. He knew that silence was more powerful than protest. Silence could not be twisted, could not be weaponized. Among the crowd stood a woman with a phone in her hand. She had raised it timidly, capturing the unfolding arrest, her fingers trembling as she filmed. Others soon followed. Screens lit up across the sidewalk, each device aimed not at Marcus but at the agents, recording every shove, every insult, every display of force. His stillness became a mirror, reflecting not guilt but dignity. The SUV door opened, and the agents forced him inside. They expected resistance, expected shouting, expected anger. Instead, Marcus leaned back against the seat, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. A single phrase lingered in his mind. Words spoken to him long ago by a sergeant who had not survived the war. The loudest strength is silence. Hours passed. Word spread faster than the agents anticipated. By the time Marcus was escorted into a federal building, a quiet storm had already begun to gather outside. Fellow attorneys, judges, veterans, and community leaders assembled with signs, with silence, with presence. They did not chant. They did not shout. They simply stood, a wall of people, their silence echoing his own. Inside the interrogation room, Marcus remained calm. Questions were hurled at him, accusations stacked high, threats delivered with pointed fingers. He did not respond, not because he lacked words, but because he knew the truth needed no defense when lies screamed too loudly. His silence unsettled the interrogators. It forced them to fill the space with their own noise, their own contradictions, until they began to stumble over themselves. The twist arrived not with a bang, but with a single door opening. A senior judge entered, flanked by two decorated veterans in uniform, men who had once served beside Marcus. The agents froze. The judge placed a folder on the table, thick with documents, affidavits, testimony that unraveled the entire case against him. The arrest, it turned out, had been not only unjustified but unlawful, a reckless abuse of power aimed at silencing a man who had become too effective at challenging authority. Marcus opened his eyes. For the first time since his detention, he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, every syllable deliberate. He said that dignity cannot be handcuffed, that truth cannot be detained. His words, though few, carried more weight than hours of accusations. The agents shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado drained. The judge's presence left no room for debate. One by one, the restraints were removed. Marcus rose to his feet, straightened his jacket, and collected his scattered papers. He looked at his captors, not with hatred, but with a quiet pity. Then he stepped outside. The crowd, now larger, parted in silence as he emerged. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, almost reverently, people began to raise their hands in a salute, not military, not formal, but a gesture of solidarity. Some pressed fists to their hearts, others simply bowed their heads. It was not orchestrated, not planned, but born from instinct, a recognition of unshakable honor. Marcus walked through them, his silence the same as it had been from the start. The agents who had detained him remained inside, watching through glass windows as the tide of public respect shifted against them. They had tried to break him, to shame him, to strip him of authority. Instead, they had elevated him, turned his calm into a rallying cry. Later, people would share the footage across every platform, the images of a man standing in silence while power tried to crush him. They would quote his few words, holding onto them like a mantra. Dignity cannot be handcuffed. Truth cannot be detained. The story spread because it was not just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had stood accused for daring to stand tall. His calm had become their shield, his silence their voice. And when Marcus returned to his office the next day, he did so not as a man defeated, but as one strengthened. He placed his scarred hand over the old photograph on his desk, the faces of those lost in war. He whispered that their sacrifice had not been in vain, that their lessons had carried him through another battlefield. This one fought not with weapons but with dignity. The world outside his window carried on, noisy and restless, but Marcus Red moved forward with the same unshakable calm. His silence had spoken louder than any argument, louder than any shouting crowd. It had revealed a truth that could not be ignored, that true strength needs no spectacle, no defense, only the courage to endure until justice reveals itself. And so his story lingered, a reminder to all who heard it. Respect is not given by power, it is earned by honor. Strength is not in the noise we make, but in the dignity we refuse to surrender. If you are watching this now, ask yourself where you stand when silence meets injustice. Ask yourself what strength you carry even unseen. Share where you are listening from, share what you felt, and join in honoring the silent heroes whose voices are often drowned out but never erased. Because sometimes the quietest stand becomes the loudest echo.